If you're a thrill seeker, then you need to hear this. This is not just any ordinary ghost story. It's a tale that has been whispered in hushed tones for generations, a story that has sent shivers down the spines of even the bravest souls. It's a story that will make you question the very fabric of reality and the thin veil that separates our world from the unknown. The story of Julia and the vanishing house will chill you to the bone. Imagine a house that appears and disappears at will, a house that seems to have a mind of its own, a house that lures unsuspecting victims into its dark, mysterious depths. This is the story of such a house and the unfortunate soul who dared to uncover its secrets. On the outskirts of a forgotten town stood a house shrouded in mystery. It was a place that locals avoided, a place that was spoken of only in whispers. The house was said to be cursed, a place where the boundary between the living and the dead was blurred. It was a house that seemed to exist in a different dimension, a place where time stood still. Locals whispered about it, a grand Victorian home that appeared only on certain nights, always in the mist. The house was a relic of a bygone era, a place that seemed to be frozen in time. It was said that the house would appear out of nowhere, shrouded in a thick, impenetrable fog, and then vanish just as mysteriously. Those who had seen it spoke of its eerie beauty, its haunting presence, and the sense of dread that seemed to emanate from its very walls. For years, it was just a tale, until one night it reappeared. The night was dark and stormy, the kind of night that seemed to be ripped straight out of a horror movie. The fog was thick, wrapping around the town like a suffocating blanket. And then, out of the mist, the house appeared, its dark silhouette looming ominously against the night sky. Julia, a curious traveler, heard the story from a bartender. She was a woman of adventure, always seeking out new experiences and thrills. The bartender, an old man with a weathered face and a voice like gravel, told her the tale of the vanishing house. He spoke of the house's mysterious appearances, the strange occurrences that surrounded it, and the people who had disappeared without a trace. Dismissing it as folklore, she decided to see for herself. Julia was not one to be easily scared. She had faced danger before, and the idea of a haunted house intrigued her more than it frightened her. She laughed off the bartender's warnings, convinced that the story was nothing more than a local legend, a tale told to scare children and gullible tourists. With a lantern in hand, she ventured into the mist, drawn to the forgotten road. The night was cold, and the fog was so thick that she could barely see a few feet in front of her. But Julia was determined. She followed the old, overgrown path that led to the outskirts of town, her lantern casting a dim, flickering light in the darkness. The deeper she walked, the thicker the fog became, until the house loomed before her, a dark silhouette in the night. It was just as the bartender had described. A grand Victorian home, its dark, imposing structure barely visible through the dense fog. Julia felt a chill run down her spine, but she pressed on, her curiosity outweighing her fear. Its windows were lifeless, the air heavy with silence. The house seemed to be watching her, its dark windows like empty eyes staring into her soul. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of her own footsteps and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. Julia felt a sense of unease, but she was determined to uncover the truth. Despite every instinct to flee, she stepped inside. The door creaked open and Julia hesitated for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. But her curiosity got the better of her, and she stepped over the threshold into the dark, eerie interior of the house. The door creaked open, revealing a dusty, untouched interior. The air was stale, and the house smelled of decay and neglect. It was as if time had stood still inside the house, everything frozen in place, untouched for decades. Julia's lantern cast long, flickering shadows on the walls, adding to the eerie atmosphere. It looked abandoned for decades, yet not a speck of dust disturbed its surface. The furniture was old and worn, but there was no sign of dust or cobwebs. It was as if the house had been preserved in a time capsule, untouched by the passage of time. Julia felt a sense of unease, but she pressed on, determined to uncover the house's secrets. As she wandered deeper, faint footsteps echoed behind her. Julia froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She turned quickly, but there was no one there. The hallway was empty, the only sound the faint echo of her own footsteps. She shook her head, convinced that her mind was playing tricks on her, and continued on. Turning quickly, she saw only her shadow, distorted by dim light. Her breath quickened. The shadows seemed to move and shift, creating eerie shapes on the walls. Julia's breath came in short, quick gasps, her fear growing with each passing moment. But she was determined to see this through no matter what. Then, a low whisper called her name from upstairs. The voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it sent a chill down Julia's spine. She felt a sense of dread, but also a strange compulsion to follow the voice. It was as if the house itself was calling to her, drawing her deeper into its dark, mysterious depths. Frightened but compelled, she followed the voice up a narrow staircase. The stairs creaked under her weight, each step echoing in the silence. The air grew colder as she ascended, and the sense of dread grew stronger. But Julia was determined to uncover the truth, no matter what. At the top, a single door stood ajar. The door was old and worn, its paint peeling and faded. It seemed to beckon to her, inviting her to step inside. Julia hesitated for a moment, her hand trembling as she reached for the doorknob. But her curiosity got the better of her, and she pushed the door open. She pushed it open to find an empty room, save for an ancient, tall mirror. The room was dark and empty, the only light coming from her lantern. The mirror was old and ornate, its surface tarnished and cracked. It seemed out of place in the otherwise empty room, a relic of a bygone era. In the reflection, no room, no house, just a barren landscape with a lone figure far in the distance. Julia stared at the mirror, her heart pounding in her chest. The reflection showed a desolate, barren landscape with a lone figure standing far in the distance. It was as if the mirror was a window into another world, a world that was dark and empty. Suddenly the door slammed shut. The sound was deafening, echoing through the empty house. Julia spun around, her heart racing. But the room was empty, the door closed tight. She felt a sense of panic, her fear growing with each passing moment. Julia spun around, but the room had vanished, replaced by the field in the mirror, pulling her closer. The room seemed to dissolve around her, replaced by the barren landscape in the mirror. Julia felt a strange force pulling her towards the mirror, as if it was drawing her into its dark, empty world. With a scream, she tried to escape, but it was too late. Julia screamed, her voice echoing through the empty house. She tried to run, but the force was too strong. It was as if the mirror was alive, pulling her into its dark, empty world. The mirror's surface rippled, swallowing her whole. The surface of the mirror seemed to ripple and shift like water. Julia felt herself being pulled into the mirror, her body dissolving into the dark, empty world on the other side. By morning, the house had vanished again, so had Julia. The house disappeared as mysteriously as it had appeared, leaving no trace behind. Julia was gone, swallowed by the dark, empty world in the mirror. No one ever saw her, or the house again. Julia was never seen again, her disappearance a mystery that would never be solved. The house vanished, leaving no trace behind. It was as if it had never existed, a ghostly presence that had come and gone, leaving only a chilling tale in its wake. But some say if you listen closely, you can still hear her footsteps in the mist. The legend of the vanishing house lives on, a chilling tale that continues to haunt the town. Some say that on certain nights, when the fog is thick and the air is still, you can still hear Julia's footsteps echoing through the mist. It's a reminder that some mysteries are never meant to be solved, and some stories are best left untold.